town of Nil in Victoria's northwest is about as different to the rice paddies of Southeast Asia as you can get. But this town has been going about its own migration program for almost a decade.
Most of the people who live in the city, they're kind of like stuck there. They don't know what are the opportunities out there for them.
Our migration program has focused really heavily on high educated, high skilled individuals, and these are the people who want to be working in the sectors that are in the cities.
Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth drive very much the Australian economy, and they continue to bring in people. Whereas regional Australia continues to lose young people and therefore continues to age.
Yes, here. Like many employers in regional Australia, John Millington was struggling to attract workers.
Where are you working? Which sector?
In 2010, the then manager of the duck farm, the town's largest employer, identified an unlikely source of labour in a group of refugees recently arrived to Melbourne, the Karen people from rural Myanmar.
See, we're making Aussie out of you yet,
It's not just a matter of one employer who had a good idea to bring some people in, and we're only thinking about half a dozen perhaps. But what we needed to do was make sure that our community, our Nil community, understood what the hell we were doing.
In just 8 years, the Karen people have grown to 10% of a town of only 2,000 people. Heine Muno is a registered nurse. She's one of 6 Karen staff here, helping to solve the critical shortage of nurses in regional Australia.
We're looking after elderly people, mostly local people who actually required help, and it's not safe for them to stay at home.
Is it your second day here?
Without that, we couldn't have grown. Our hospital would have stood still, the same as the businesses would have stood still.
It's estimated the Karen settlement is worth more than $41 million to the region's economy. There are 3 fundamental factors which drive population: births, deaths and migration. See, the last time we were having enough babies to keep our population stable was back in 1976. And not even the controversial baby bonus back in 2002 was enough to turn things around. Meanwhile, life expectancy has grown to 80.5 years for men and 84.6 years for women, and no amount of government policy can ultimately prevent deaths. That leaves migration as the only practical lever of population control. And over the last decade, we've been importing more people than are being born here. That's why when we talk about population, what we're really talking about is migration and what role it'll play in the future of Australia.
Immigration has become the defining, divisive issue of our time.
Abel Rizvi spent over a decade at the most senior levels of Australia's immigration department.
More than 3.6 million migrants, that is 1 in 7 people in the country, have arrived in the last 20 years, which transformed Australia in terms of its age composition, in terms of its skill composition, and in terms of its ethnic composition.
Too often politicians keep saying we just need to shift, we just need to decentralise and shift Australia's population growth to the regions. Well, Australia's been trying to decentralise for 100 years without much success.
At Bonegilla near Albury, they're making new Australians. 840 people from the Baltic states are going to school here.
To fully understand how fundamental migration has been to our population, you need to come here to this former army camp outside Albury-Wodonga. This is our Ellis Island. This is the birthplace of multicultural Australia. In fact, 5% of the entire Australian population can be traced to post-war migrants whose new lives in Australia began right here.
Bonegilla was a huge reception centre set up by the federal government in 1947 to receive non-British migrants.
In 1949, we were one of the first people that came out here. We were cold, we were tired. We could see a future for us, where we couldn't see a future in Europe.
Doina Eitler was one of 310,000 migrants who came through these basic huts. She arrived here from Romania via Austria with her family as a child.
I didn't even know what it was, but it was the magpies. They're carolling. And I've always associated the magpies carolling with coming to Australia.
New citizens, eager, alert, youthful, marching out to meet a new life, marching out into a great country, which is indeed the land of opportunity.
Some people talk about putting them in a sheep dip of enjoying country life and seeing what it was like. And there was always that hope that it would decentralise Australia. Back in the 50s and 60s, we were so interested in growing our population. We celebrated it, and government was forever boasting about what migration had done.
And without immigration, the future of the Australia we know will be both uneasy and brief. As a nation, we shall not survive.
My dad was the last cook in the kitchen here.
German migrant Ray Klepiak and his family called Bongilla home for 6 years.
He enjoyed his work, he was a perfectionist in what he did. All we got told was like my mum and dad. They just sat us down and they said, from now on, we do what the Australians do. We speak Australian, we act Australians, and we are going to be Australians. And that's what we did.
Ray and Doina both settled near Wodonga and stayed, but they are very much in the minority.
I think the majority eventually found their way to cities after the 2-year contract. There were a lot of people that were dissatisfied with the kind of reception that they got at Bongilla, and they were dissatisfied with the way that the government settled them into Australia.
It's a history lesson for the government of today, with the new Minister for Population, Alan Tudge, announcing a plan to settle migrants in regional areas for 5 years.
I think it's a bit of a pipe dream to think that you can suddenly put up migrant-proof fences and electronic tags and somehow hold migrants to regional areas.
After a period, those skilled migrants behave like all other young Australians. They get attracted to Melbourne, Sydney, Perth and Brisbane.
The only way we can slow down population growth is to slow down the number of migrants that we're bringing into the country. And this has implications for all sorts of things.
2 hours' drive from Nil is Stawell, a town working not only to maintain its population, but hopefully to entice international migrants and people away from the cities. While Nil had a shortage of people, Stawell had a shortage of jobs, two of the biggest factors in managing a population. 10 years ago, Richie Guerrero arrived directly to Stawell from the Philippines. He says migrants are essential to keeping his adopted town afloat.
They're helping the business as well to grow. Stawell is a quiet town, you can't get much worker here.
With production at the abattoir expanding, it's now the town's largest employer. It's helping retain workers in one of the most valuable agricultural regions in Australia, worth $4.1 billion to the economy.
If we're going to support that sort of population, we need to produce more, off the same area we've got now.
Primary producer Scott Nicholson has seen jobs and industry come full circle in his town.
Yeah, I think Stawell's had a troubled time for a little while. When we first moved here, the mine was booming and the mine was sort of everything, but it slowly started to taper off.
In 2016, the gold mine cut 150 workers overnight.
You can imagine 150 jobs 2 weeks before Christmas. The ripple effect to our community was potentially catastrophic.
It's a big base, isn't it?
It's a massive base.
The council quickly set about seeking opportunities to save the population by boosting the local economy, and no idea was too harebrained.
As ridiculous as the concept might sound, the reality was, why don't we put a wind farm with an undercover cropping operation?
The result will be the world's first hydroponic glasshouse powered completely by wind. A project partly funded by the state government, the operation is touted as a boon for the once weakened region.
56 turbines, a $630 million investment, going to provide 270 ongoing jobs.
We are seeing the convergence, I think, in the agricultural area, particularly horticultural side, of not only things like undercover or hydroponics in its form, but also a much better use of water with much less use of energy.
And now the mine has reopened too. Regions like these show employment goes a long way in helping to decentralise Australia's population. Migration has become the biggest influence on our booming population and its distribution. That distribution is something an Australian government will once again try to moderate.
Certainly over the last 20 years, the Australian economy has become very much hooked on migration. We are hooked on the skills that they deliver. We are hooked on the export income that they deliver. We are hooked on the budget benefits that they deliver.
Unless you get down and dirty, you know what I mean? You can't belong.